Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Quarantine with Brennifry. As always, I'm Tori. Today, we're going to be talking about Merlin. It's going to be super fun. As far as the week goes, nothing too crazy out of the ordinary. Just another week in quarantine, another week of, pushing off all responsibilities for the fall semester for my, 1.5 classes I have. Right, it's hard to build a syllabus when you're like, is this class of 4 gonna fill? But we'll see. Who knows? It might. Other than that, though, just been kind of hanging out with my cats, hanging out with my husband, watching TV. Super into Pokemon Legends or Journeys or whatever it's called right now. The new one on Netflix. So good. I'm can't stop watching it. I'm obsessed with it. It's so good.
I'm finding Go a little bit annoying though.
He's a little bit annoying, but he's also Ash's boyfriend, and we're cool friends, and we're gonna respect who Ash dates.
That's fair. Yeah.
But I also feel Go is all of us in every Pokemon game, right? He's Mew's gonna be my first Pokemon because that's who I'm gonna get. Catches literally every Pokemon he sees, and I'm honestly, same though.
That's what I enjoyed about Go's character, is that he had such a newbie enthusiasm towards Pokemon. He's I'm gonna catch 3 Wurmple.
Right.
I have to get that butterfly, cocoon Pokemon, Moth, whatever. And so Cascoon and the other guy, and Silcoon. And she's
right.
I'm just going to catch 3 because my odds will be better. And then he ends up getting 3 Cascoons, right?
Right. And then I like how he's oh, the whole Caterpie line's here. I'll just catch 1 of each because it's evolving them is too much work. I'm same though. But yeah, so I kind of love him, and I love his what is he wanted to call it Bunnelby, but it's not Bunnelby. The little fire bunny. Score Bunny. I haven't played Sword and Shield, so this is all new and shiny to me. I'm who's that Pokemon? And I'm I don't know. But yeah, so I've been really enjoying it. I'm having a great time watching it. It's been a lot of joy. I like the opening theme a lot because I didn't like the second opening theme for Alola. So I actually find myself watching the opening this time around because I like the song, and I like that Team Rocket stepped up their game. They were oh, we're gonna use our Team Rocket balls with our Team Rocket Pokemon, which I thought was pretty cool. But so far, although there's only been 1 episode, but still, for me, I haven't finished. But that's what I've been doing. I'm gonna pass on over to Jen. Or yeah, well, I said Jen. I meant to say Brenda, but you guys can decide.
You didn't do your share of the week though.
Oh, share of the week. You are right. I'm a mess today. Right, my share of the week. I got this from Brenda for my graduation, and it is a Digimon crest tag with the Crest of Sincerity in it, and I love it so very, very much. And I keep it on my desk, and I look at it all the time. It's next to my little Palmon, so I can help her Digivolve. And yeah, that's my share of the week. I'll throw it over to Brenda.
All right. Hi, everyone. This week has been pretty busy in terms of work. I've been grading pretty much all week. I put it off on Monday, and so that meant that the rest of the week I was just grading papers. And so what I try to do is cut it into shorter stacks so that it doesn't feel like I'm grading all day. But I was still grading all day because I would get distracted by TV or friends texting me or, my dogs barking up a hellstorm, which they do often. So yeah, that took up the majority of my week. Then I started reading some stuff, and then a lot of just kind of sleeping in, right? Because time is irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I get up, it's oh, it's 9. Okay, I guess I'll start my work day. But then that just means I'm working longer, right? Because then I feel guilty, so I'll be working till I think it was one of these days, and I'm oh my goodness, it's 8. And my friends are yeah, we told you at 5 to get off the computer. And I'm oops, the sun is still out. It's daytime, so it's still a work day.
And that's, the lines have blurred so much between home and work with this kind of working from home that we've all been doing as teachers. And I find myself just work. Like last semester, I felt like I had less classes than I have in fall typically, and I felt like I had more because I just was constantly working.
And you're constantly answering emails from students who are panicking, and so you don't want them to go to sleep panicking, so you'll answer an email at 11 at night when you know you should be asleep because you have to get up early in the morning, right? And so even like all of that is just a hot mess, and it's just it's tiring, typically teachers use the summer to decompress and relax a little bit. That's not happening this semester or this summer.
And
It's just not. It's not a thing because we're all preparing our classes to go online, and there's so many different styles of online teaching that you kind of have to figure out what's your style while still maintaining the same level, the same caliber of instruction so that your students don't feel like you're pushing them into the deep end. So, I mean, I could talk about this all day, obviously, but I won't. I'll spare you the details. Just know that most teachers out there are tired. They're really tired.
Yeah, as a little sprinkle, just for people who aren't teachers to know, when you email an instructor and we email you back, most likely we can't do that from our bed in our pajamas on our phone. We have to actually get up, go to our computer, pull up the stuff, pull out the file you need or whatever that is. So it's like just a quick thing we can shoot from like laying in bed watching TV. Just like we do it because
and
we can.
There's so much, right? Because like I know like on my LMS, the learning management system that we're using, I put everything in multiple places so that my students can find it everywhere, right? Like it's clearly labeled on the side so they can have quick access to it, but it's also embedded into the modules. But all of that stuff takes like forever to set up, and then students still can't find it sometimes. So it's like, okay, wait, let me give you the directions so that you can find it, even though there's like a video over here. And it's exhausting.
One time I was showing my students that I can see their activity on Canvas, like I can see how many hours they've been logged in, and they saw because it shows mine too, and they were like, "You're at 200 hours. You must have left your computer on." I'm like, "No, that was me setting everything up."
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. So I have the same thing. And so like that's the thing. Same Blackboard will give you like the tracking, right? And it's like I don't want to track. I don't want to know how many hours I'm spending. I don't need to know how many hours they're spending. I'm not surveilling them. Like it's up to them, right? But it's like every time Blackboard will ask you, "Oh, are you doing this? Are you doing this?" No, just a new one. But anyway, that's been my week. That's been a lot of like summer engagement, but also fall planning. So all of that is exhausting. But my share of the week is actually pretty boring and kind of dumb, I think. But it's actually one of my favorite things in the whole world because it's what I use to research. And that is my Superman pencil.
Oh.
I got a bunch of these for Tori's birthday, and I gave them out to like as party favors for one of Tori's.
I have Flash.
Yeah. And so I have these, and so Jen has some of these too. And it was just a superhero theme, and they're silly, I know, but like when I'm researching, I don't like using a pen because there's something so final about a pen. And so I'll be writing my notes in pencil on the side, right? And so I had a lead pencil, but it just doesn't have the same feel that a wood pencil has. And so I have a few of these, but this is the one I'm currently using right now.
I'm too afraid to sharpen it because I don't want it to go away because I have it on display.
That's what I had. Me too, right? But now that I'm only working at home, I'm just using these.
I have Green Lantern as well.
Yeah, and every time I pick it up, I remember like that day that we all like got together and we had dinner. It was just such a nice and mellow birthday for you, right? Like we went to
for the people watching, I traditionally get forgot about on my birthday a lot of times. And Brenda threw together this like amazing surprise birthday party for me. And she like made like Justice League identification passes so we could be in the Justice League.
No, it was a team effort. It was totally a team effort.
And then like we had these pencils and like it was so cool. Like I would show you the pass, but I have it like on my desk. I have it like glued to like the front of my desk, like as like a name tag.
Yeah, no, that year was a total collaboration between Jen and I. Like, yeah, because Jen is like
Brenda supplied the like party favors, And then I supplied the craft favors. So like I did in collaboration with a colleague of mine, I did the passes and I did individual coloring books for
Let me see
you.
if I can get it. Yes, the coloring books are great.
And then like the coloring books really were like
Personalized
images that like or like related to animes that Tori loves. So yeah, that was something that I really wanted to put together for him, and everyone got a coloring book.
You gotta see it.
Yeah. Everyone became a member of the Justice League.
Everyone,
we're all 5 years old in our hearts.
Yes, and then everyone got a coloring book inspired by like anime that or cartoons that Tori.
I think I have that still too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
you better.
I do. Yeah.
Waiting for Corey to come back with his coloring book.
Yay!
I have cases too.
Yay! Yeah, I got those bound at Staples.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There's like the back. Oh, wait, I haven't colored this page yet. There's like the background stuff. Very fun.
That was my share of the week. I'll leave it over to
like, these are all the things we do in quarantine because
you're just like a bunch of shares of the week.
Like you wish you had friend goals like us.
I obviously get very crafty around people's birthdays when I have a lot of creative energy. Sometimes I don't. It really depends. But yeah, I think you could tell from our loopiness right now that we are a bit loopy and a bit tired, and quarantine is really kind of hitting us in weird ways. I'm tired. I think I haven't been sleeping well, and then I do sleep. I think my whole sleep schedule is completely messed up because then I'll nap in the afternoon and then I won't be able to go to sleep at night. And the weather is sort of hot and cold, so I think that's part of what's playing into like not being able to sleep well. But in terms of what my week has been, I've just again watching a lot of Netflix and Hulu. Like I recently discovered or rediscovered Iron Chef, and so like I'm so into that right now. I think I'm in like the second season that's available on Hulu, which is season 12, and it's Tori and Brennan I love Food Wars, the manga, because like the competition aspect of it, but I like the creativity that is inspired. Like I love seeing like creatives just at like at competition with one another. That's why I like the Greatest Baking, British Bake Off. I love like those kind of shows, and so like Iron Chef is like I get to see like these culinary geniuses just go at it with these like weird ingredients, and I'm just like, wow, I will never be that great of a cook, but I can admire your talent. But yeah, it's been really really great to be watching that, and that's sort of like really helped with like the monotony and just of like work. Unlike Brenda, I'm in the Tory camp where I haven't really set up anything for fall. And I'm not really doing much for summer in terms of teaching because I'm just facilitating a class that was built for me. So yeah, I'm just kind of ignoring the problem that's to do the work, and because I don't want to focus on that right now.
That's an August problem.
That's an August problem, yeah. Like I don't want to look at how many hours I've actually poured into Animal Crossing because like Nintendo does track that for you, and I'm pretty sure that I'm over 400 hours. So that's crazy. I become very obsessive.
You got your money's worth.
Exactly.
So much.
Well, like I was talking to a couple of other friends about this. It's like Nintendo Switch games are about $60, right? I bought the Switch because I wanted to play Pokemon, but every profile that I see of my friends, like I see that they're able to complete the game in 35 hours or 37 hours, and that was my and then I look at like something like Animal Crossing. price, but there's so many like milestones that you have to hit in the game that it's like sort of just ongoing, that you spend so much more time on it, and that becomes much more, that's a game that's worth it in terms of like the money that you spent, right? Because you're getting so much out of it, right? And it's really upsetting because like now Pokemon just launched an expansion pack, right? But you have to pay for that, and you're just going to get through that within like 20 hours. So like, is that really worth it, right? So those are the types of conversations I'm having. In terms of my share of the week, it's Comic-Con weekend. So Comic-Con is doing a Comic-Con at home. I haven't really checked out any of the content yet, but I've sort of been like following-ish, right, the news. I don't know where it exists. I feel like they need to get better at like setting up like social media accounts that really just kind of point people in a direction of where the content is. But I wanted to share this because of Comic-Con weekend. So I actually got this signed by Scott Snyder. Yay!
The best friend, by the way.
Yes, he was the author of American Vampire at WonderCon, and we weren't able to go to WonderCon because it was canceled this year because of coronavirus, COVID-19, which, great, but, that was a singularly great moment for me because I got to meet the author of American Vampire, who I wrote my master's thesis on American Vampire, so it was really great to just briefly talk to him about it and sort of have him confirm that I was like on track with like what I wrote about.
He was into it. He like lit up like a Christmas tree and was like, yes. Like, and then was even talking to you about like the book that isn't done that he's working on. He's like, this is where I'm going. Like, and it was great. It was a wonderful.
It was a great moment. And I also wanted to bring up American Vampire because DC and he and Raphael just announced that they're gonna launch the final 9 issues of American Vampire this fall. So I'm just like, yes!
But also, no, it's ending.
Yes. But also, like, I want to know how it ends and if I'm right. And so I wanted to share those 2 reasons. But this book is also really special to me because I was a dummy. I knew that he was going to be there, but I didn't prepare for that day. We had a presentation that day as well. So, like, I was obviously just thinking about my presentation. But Tori, ever the preparer, brought his copy of American Vampire. And he just let me in. We were waiting in line, so you have to wait in line to see the buy a copy.
The line was enormous.
The line was enormous, and like Tori's was like, "Here, take it. I will get something else signed." And I'm like, I will buy. I had another copy that's signed that I eventually will give to Tori. But yeah, he was gracious. Tori was so gracious to know that this was so important to me that he just said, "Take it. I know this is important. You need to get this signed." So thank you so much, Tori.
Of course. I had Batman with me anyways, so like it was fine.
So that
is goals.
Yeah, this is what happens when you're part of the Brennifry, because then I also made Brenda stand in line, and she hates being still for like more than 5 minutes.
But then they got starstruck and forgot to get their poster signed. And so I pretended that I didn't get them signed and waited in line again to get them signed for them. But then I cut the line because I was like, I forgot I'm dumb. Because they had forgotten to get them signed so what happened was Jen got starstruck having her conversation, and then Brenda was recording it, and they forgot to get their stuff signed like in the process. And so I went back in line to get it signed for them.
You.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, I remember getting.
I actually got it signed by Capullo, but
yes.
not Snyder, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I got it wrong, signed by the wrong guy. Moron. Yeah. I'm like, Jenna's having her moment. That was more important to get on, like photographic evidence of that. It's a lot more important.
And this is why I love you both, because I think we all ended up pushing each other to get these moments, right? And so this is the beauty of Brennifry.
There were so many comic
So
writers on the floor that year
uh,
too. It was amazing. Like they were all there, like
yeah,
all of them, like every
This was
single one.
last year, guys. This was last year.
yeah, that is striking. Yeah, I remember that. Like we got posters signed by like Higgins for Power Rangers.
Higgins,
We
Bennett.
got yeah, Bennett, and then also Tomasi, right, for Superboy.
Tomasi was there, yeah, and I cried at him with several other fans because there was like this herd of like fangirls that like he wasn't there, then he was, and this like herd of fangirls just like ran over crying, and I was part of it. We were like, we just love Super Sons so much. And he's like, well, I just ended it, sorry. And we're like, it's okay, we forgive you. Like, and then Pratt was there. Pratt?
Joelle
Jones was there.
Jones was there, yeah.
Yeah, they were celebrating Batman. How many years? 65? 70 years Batman, something like that.
Yeah, King was there. He just said, yeah.
I know we wanted to wait for Tom King for Brenda, but like I think
he had an equally long line to Snyder, and they were at the same time, so it was one or the other.
And we had like thought about like maybe coming the next day for Tom King, and then I think Brenda was like, I'm tired of just waiting in line. I will see you, Tom King, when I see you. Which, you know, makes me sad. Like now, like those experiences are going to be so different in the future, right? And yeah, I think in some way that I like the idea of making Comic Cons more accessible virtually to folks, because like it's such an exclusive experience, right? If you're able to afford it, both.
And they've gotten so expensive.
If you're able to find the ticket, and you know, are you able?
Yeah, I remember going to Anime Expo in 6th grade. My mom took me, and the tickets were like $12. Like now they're like 72.
Right. And so like I like the idea of like the accessibility that's gonna happen afterwards, right? But I also will miss the interaction and the personal stuff that like comes out.
Artist Alley is my favorite. I love talking to the artists and buying everything.
Same.
Making bad decisions because Jen's going, treat y'all sale. YOLO is what Jen always says. Then I'm like, yeah, fuck it. Here's my credit card.
And then Casey's like, no.
Like the Agumon. Okay, so there was a statue at WonderCon that I went to. I was reaching for. I was like, yes, because it's Ty writing Greymon, and I needed it, but it was like $250, and I was reaching for it, and like there were sparkles in my eyes, and it was always in my hand. Then out comes my husband's arm, and he just yoinks me back. Like he was like, nope. He's like, I draw the line at $250. Like. He's like, it's just gonna stay on your desk. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's the point. Like, I'll get to see
and then you worked 9 and then you worked 9 classes in the fall, and you're like,
I deserved it.
You deserved it, yeah.
That whole line is really cute. I was looking at the line. It's like $10 bajillion for all of it, but it's adorbs.
It's really great, yeah. So obviously we're very loopy and kind of losing track of time, but we are recording behind. So we are recording on a day we normally would not have recorded. So I think that is also playing a part into things. Today's recording is going to focus on Merlin, which is, and specifically the BBC version of Merlin, is a reimagining of the Merlin tale from the perspective of a young Merlin. So you get to see Merlin really, it's a coming of age story for Merlin, and as he is discovering his powers and how to wield his powers alongside with the birth of what is to be Camelot. So you see a very young cast in these roles. So in keeping with our theme, we really wanted to, talk about reimagined tales, and we thought, Tori just finished watching Merlin. Brenda and I watched it when we were in college, and so we really wanted to bring that to the forefront, because King Arthur really is just in almost a lot, in many medias, right, and media sources, and so we kind of wanted to talk a little bit about King Arthur, and specifically through that lens of Merlin, the BBC show. So as always, I kind of, talk about King Arthur a little bit. So I want to talk about like what were your first exposures to the King Arthur myth, and what are some memories associated with that? Because I think we need to give context for
Right.
King Arthur before we launch into our discussion of Merlin.
Yeah, I think my first exposure was Disney's Sword in the Stone. I think that was really my first. I don't remember much of the movie, but I do remember really liking the movie. I liked when they were fish, like when they get turned into fish and they swim around. I don't know, for some reason as a kid I was really into that scene. But
Little Mermaid.
yeah, I was like, I want to be a fish and swim around. But I don't really remember much of it. I remember there was that like weird lady that was dancing around, and then like I think there was an alligator at some point. But like I don't really remember much of the movie. And then a couple years later, Quest for Camelot, which was like I think a Fox movie, I was obsessed with. My brother and I were so obsessed with that movie. Did you guys ever watch that one?
Mm-mm.
It's real good. It's like the Anastasia version of Arthur.
Oh.
But it's like less focused on Arthur. It's like Arthur's already established and he's got his Knights of the Round Table, and then this like farmhand girl, like they get attacked and beaten, and then this farmhand girl goes to like get like Excalibur back and save the day, and her sidekick is a guy her age who's blind, and they like navigate through this world together. It was so great. Like I was so into it. Like yeah.
Sounds fantastic.
It's called Quest for Camelot. I remember like being obsessed with that. My brother and I used to watch it like every night. So those were like my two kind of early ones. And then after that, I didn't really get anything until like maybe grad school, other than like anime spin-offs of it. So like Saber and like Fate Stay in the Fate series. Like Fate Stay Night was the first one I watched. And we have a female King Arthur in that one, and stuff like that. And she's pretty popular as King Arthur, at least in the anime fandom. But yeah, that's been my exposure to the Arthur myth and legend.
I actually don't know. I don't remember. I remember seeing Sword in the Stone. I don't remember enjoying it. I just know it was like in the background somewhere.
Yeah, like the fish, right?
Yeah. I remember the sword. I remember knowing that the Sword in the Stone was important.
Yeah.
But it was really around 6th grade that I really started getting into mythology. And it was, so my mom worked as a cleaning lady in PV, Palos Verdes. And one of the girls was going to college at the time. And she had just finished the semester. And she had heard that I was really into reading. And she's like, oh, here, I have this Cliff Notes book, right, of mythology. You might like it. And so she just gave it to me. Some of the stuff in there was really inappropriate for a 6th grader. But, I was reading stuff. I didn't care. I was just consuming. And so I got like information as fast as I could. And I remember really being into, like, there was a section on the King Arthur legends, and I remember really enjoying it and liking it. And so then like there would be like an episode here or there like of Xena, where they kind of allude to King Arthur or Hercules, which makes no sense, right? But at the same time it did. And then there were episodes of like different, like it was just in and Relic Hunter.
I feel like Wishbone did it too.
Yeah, and so like it was a lot of like allusions to King Arthur that I remember, and then it came back in a really big way when Charmed did a story on King Arthur that I'm still really fascinated by because of all the gender commentary that occurs or lack thereof. Because I feel like the show, for its time, was progressive and feminist, but it's very white feminist, right? And so even the ways that King Arthur kind of comes into the story, I'm still fascinated by it. And it's so messed up and so interesting to watch, right? Because this is the thing, right? I can't watch something and just be like, oh, that's cool, there's magic, right? I'm always like picking apart stuff, and I know like Jen always has to listen to me rant about different things, so I do apologize for that. But you knew what you were signing up for when you became my friend, so yeah. And then there's a bunch, like Stargate does a whole King Arthur thing. So when Merlin came around, I was really into the series. I also, again, in grad school, I took like a King Arthur class where we were just reading medieval literature, and kind of looking at Arthur when he was young, right? So young Arthur's court, and so then comes along Merlin, and it kind of embodies that. And so I was really interested in it. But I think the thing that really caught me off guard, and I think a lot of fans were caught off guard as well, but I really enjoyed it and I really responded well to it. It was Gwen being cast as a Black British woman, and Merlin being young, right? Those two things really made the show for me. Like they piqued my interest, and it was British. I really like British TV, right? I'm wearing a TARDIS dress, right? If that's any indication of how I respond to British television and British programming, the way that Jen loves Korean variety and K-dramas, I like British TV, just because it's so, it's different, right? Whereas with American TV, we get our happy endings, and like other people aren't obsessed with the happy endings in the way that Americans are. And so I just really enjoy that. I don't know what that says about me, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that, like you, Brenda, I'm not quite sure where, or, can't pinpoint exactly the show that I picked up King Arthur. I feel like there are a bunch of allusions, maybe even like short, like episodes devoted to the myth. But I remember that, King Arthur, I grew up with the myth of King Arthur, but I grew up with the American version, maybe, or even just like the sanitized version of it, right? Which is like it's not the medieval lore version that we ended up learning about in our graduate school experience. It's very much like the authority and the mysticism associated with the Round Table, right? And it's like a group of individuals fighting under a united banner and for a united cause, which was really intriguing. And I think I was just so intrigued by like the idea of Gwen and Arthur together, right? And just like this epic kind of romance. But then, later I find out, oh yeah, there's an affair. And then also I find out that like, depending on the version, that's not necessarily something that's like really emphasized, right? And so, I think that the King Arthur myth, and you can see it in so many of our media, like that fair unknown figure that like Brenda brought up a couple of recordings ago, right? And that idea that like there's this one person that's going to, lead the charge and like reunite a country under a banner and like really fight against prophesized evil, I think is always going to be a very intriguing log line, right? And then there's also like Excalibur, the sword, right? And how there's this ancient weapon that's imbued with so much power that only one person can wield. I think is a very enticing trope that you see often in our media as well, right? And we see so many shows come out of this Arthur myth, right? And just reimagining of the tale, and it's always either the focus is either on a young, like on an Arthur that's growing up and finding himself and his identity, or it's on the idea of like that sword and how that sword is going to pass on that like power and legacy, right? I think nowadays you're getting more of an emphasis on Merlin, the character, who is, in The Sword of the Stone, is a kooky kind of like old white guy that is like kind of
like
right,
he's like Dumbledore, right? Big, that old,
a little bit. That is a little loony but well-meaning and kind of like a nice grandpa figure, and then you have recent iterations of Merlin that really just highlight the darkness of his character and the just like the shady things that he does, right? I think that's been the emphasis lately with the Merlin character. So I think for us, like I do want to talk a little bit about, I do want to launch into Merlin, but I do want to talk a little bit about like our literary backgrounds, right? Because we all went through a grad program, and one of our particularly favorite instructors is a medievalist. And so we did get exposure to that medieval literature. And so we know where these myths come from, right? And where they arrive from. And so how did we reconcile our ideas of the Arthur myth with the textual evidence that was presented in our classes?
It was confusing for me, actually. I actually struggled because, like, I like to feel that I have a pretty sharp memory, and I would, like, remember things, and I'd be like, oh, a connection, and I'd, like, want to, like, write about it, then I'd be like, wait, no, that was, like, Fate Stay Night, or, oh, no, that was Soul Eater, or Seven Deadly Sins, or whatever, right? Like that line between what was, like, in the actual canon, you like Mort de Arthur, or, you know, whatever we were reading, versus, like, kind of these reimaginings. I often got my wires crossed in the classroom.
I don't know. I think for me it was a little bit different. It might be because when I go into the classroom, I just assume I don't know shit, right? And so what I end up doing is, and maybe this is unhealthy, I think, I like thinking back on my own learning, the way that I process information. I'm not gonna, I don't know, Jen like showed me a video a few weeks ago that just kind of broke me, and I think that's actually part of it. Because what I would do is I would kind of disassociate everything that I already know, like my existing knowledges, from the classroom, right? And so kind of learning about all of this, it was interesting. It was really fascinating for me, because you see a lot of like the tropes, right? The fair unknown that I see in telenovelas, right? I would make those connections, or like John, like when I talk about the fair unknown, when I think of like Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, right? He has this noble lineage, but it is a secret to everyone and nobody knows it. So he is fair because he's part of this nobility, but he's unknown because he's like, we don't know his backstory, right? And so whenever I would see that, I would make these connections, but I didn't necessarily bring them into the classroom, mostly because I just didn't participate in class discussions. But the other thing was I was just trying to understand how we got from the literature we were reading in class to like the modern day iterations that we were seeing. So I don't think at any point I reconciled them together, right? I'm not a traditionalist. I don't think that you need to, like, whatever we read, like, I don't feel like we have to stay completely true to the original story, because that's boring, right? I like when it changes and it's reimagined in a different way for a different context and a different audience. So it's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed Merlin. And one of the reasons I never responded very well to like the older 80s versions of the King Arthur myths, right? But quick shout out to MythQuest. Did you guys ever watch MythQuest when you were kids?
It sounds familiar, but I'm not.
It was a Canadian show with siblings,
Yeah.
that like went into these myths looking for their father. The girl was in a wheelchair.
Vaguely
She got into the myth. She was able to walk, and so it became this really thing. So there's an episode of King Arthur in there, and so like that kind of show, like I really enjoyed. But yeah, I don't think I ever really reconciled my graduate experience with my nerd personality.
I have two things. I really like when other cultures do their spin on cultural stories. That always has fascinated me forever. And the second one is, so I'm doing the creation counting. And the second one is, we count this way. And, the second one is, Brenda was that TV trope in school where like the kid, like the teacher asks the question and the kid writes it down on the paper but doesn't like raise their hand because they know the answer. Like that was Brenda in school. Like she would like she knew everything. She just like wouldn't allow like she just didn't like she, you know, shy and wallflower, but we got her out of that because she's a boss ass bitch.
That legit explains me as a student. Yep.
But that was like very much like that trope you see on TV. That was Brenda. Like she knew the answer, she'd write it down and then like just wouldn't tell anyone.
I had a friend in high school once, because I whispered the answer under my breath, and she turns around and she hit me in the middle of class, and she's like, "Speak louder!" And the teacher stopped. No, it wasn't Jen, but so it was me, our friend, and then Jen on this side, and Jen kind of like laughed a little bit, right? But she didn't say anything. The teacher stops lecturing and she looks at me, at my friend, and she's like, "What did you just do? Why did you hit her?" And so my friend's like, oh, because she knows the answer. She always does this. She's smart and won't say anything. And so I got like really small. Like I physically got smaller.
Brenda.
And so my teacher asked me, so what is the, and I actually do remember what the question was. It was about the gas tax. Like, why is it that we have it, right? And so I answered it, but I even remember my voice cracked when I spoke. But see, that is why I never participated.
Now look at you now. You meet like 250 strangers every semester.
Very true. Now, like, that's something that's gonna haunt Brenda for the rest of the day.
No, I'm sorry. You've come so far.
We're gonna have
about me. This is about Merlin.
We're gonna have a text message later saying like, "Thank you, Tori, for like ruining me." So this, I agree that like Brenda really is that person that Tori described. She is actually one of the smart individuals that was part of our friend group, and she just doesn't give herself enough credit. Which is why I actually wrote the question. I write questions and I sort of pitch them to Tori and Brenda, and I wrote this question specifically for Brenda because I think she'd have a really good response to how she would, she reconciled these differences, right?
I feel like I let you down because I never did.
But also for like everybody watching, just like so that you know, our inside joke is that Jen and I were like, I like the colors. And then Brenda like gives this like beautiful rendition of like theory and like, something like the way a PhD would answer. And Jen and I are over here like, the colors were pretty. Like,
you need to shut up because both of you are very smart. So,
but I think like Brenda, did talk about, you might have not like directly answered the question, but you did talk a little bit about like what students of first gen backgrounds and how they contend with their education, right? And a lot of it is disassociation from your learned knowledge and making that sphere inferior to what you are then learning in the classroom setting, right? And that is a whole other topic, right, that we can talk about later. But I think it is important for folks to know that like for first gen individuals, we often do that. We often undercut our own learned knowledge and make it inferior because we feel like we're imposters in the classroom setting and that the professor is the expert, and thus whatever they are spewing out is correct, right? And I think that is damaging in the long run and not enough. While a lot has been written, I thought not a lot of professors, while they might be on an ally, understand what that really means. And so, that is to say, like Brenda did touch upon it in a very different way. For me, like, I think, going into the classroom, like I had this very romanticized version of the King Arthur myth. And so going in and learning where these tales originated from and actually reading the literature that the original literature, I think was disappointing because it was more boring, right? And it was sort of disappointing not to have this romanticized version anymore. And, and I was kind of like, but I like my version better. The one that
kind of in French, which I thought was like a big bubble burst. like wasn't like Mort d'Arthur in like French? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I thought this was English. like England, Britain, King Arthur.
So a lot of them were in French because French was the language of the court, right? And so, but you're right, it's going into, and you're like, wait, why is this in French?
I'm like, isn't this a British story?
Right. And so, no, but I had actually, now that you mention it, Jen, I had a very similar experience. It was boring, right? Like, The Tale of the Green Knight is such an interesting story. But the actual narrative was meh.
Right. Yeah. And then, there's also like a disconnect because, while it is written in English, it's like medieval, it's Old English or very early Middle English. And so while there's similarities and words that we can pick out, there's also words we don't know how to translate. And so like I'm not a big linguist anyways, so that was a big just stumbling block for me, where I just, I was like, I don't understand this, I give up, sort of in my head, right? I performed well in the class, and I want to emphasize that I did perform well because I know how to be a good student, but that block in language really stopped me from really embracing the original tales.
It breaks the immersion when you have to like stop to look up things every couple of words. Like it's hard to like dive into the story when you're like, okay, what's this word now? Okay, now what's this word now?
Right.
Translating wasn't that bad for me. It was when we got to Beowulf, right? When we actually took the Beowulf class where the translating was so much more difficult. That was the kind of like, oh, no, this is just not for me. But I think but I think you mentioned it a few times, Jen. It's just that the picking up the language is just different for everybody, right? And so I think with Middle English, while there's a lot of similarities, you're right. There's a lot of words that kind of, if there's even that suspension of belief that Tolkien talks about, it kind of goes away when you have to look up like 5 different words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think
within 5 minutes.
Right, and I think that was what really stopped me from really embracing these iterations. And also what I enjoyed about, I guess, the butchered renditions that I was exposed to is that there seems to be a cohesiveness to the story. And then what the original tales are, both in the French version and in the Anglo-Saxon version, they're just desperate tales, right? They're oral tales that sort of are pieced together. And so, we get a very cohesive version, but it's manufactured for that reason, because they're taking points and sort of trying to make it more cohesive. What the original are just like strings of stories. And that's why like it's really hard to get into them as well and try to find like that one line that joins them together.
Sometimes you'll only get like fractions of those stories too.
Right, with characters that we're only get like a fraction of a line, and yet they are the main characters of the story, right? So I think that is to say, like, I think the big intrigue is that King Arthur myth is a really big space to really imagine, right? And to really play with these characters. And, the myth and the tales just provide a really big space to kind of manufacture a cohesive tale in whatever way, right, that you want, and any angle that you want. And so with the BBC version, you're able to focus in on a young Merlin emerging, right? And alongside and in parallel with a young Camelot that's emerging, right? Because we have the characters like Uther Pendragon to sort of support that, right? Going into Merlin, what were some things that you guys enjoyed? Brenda and I, watched this when it was somewhat airing, right, in college, and Tori came into it in April because he needed to
quarantine.
He needed to watch something in quarantine. So, what were your first impressions when it came to Merlin?
Yeah, so I liked it a lot. I'd never really heard of it like outside of you two. I don't remember like seeing commercials for it or anything on TV, like when it was airing or anything like that. I remember they were talking about it was good, and I remember I think it was like Brenda or Jen had said that like it was, had like this really great like bromance in it, and I was like, oh, that sounds fun. And then I watched a few episodes, and I was like, oh, I watched the first episode and I was kind of shaky, and then I watched the second episode and I liked it much better. So I started to like enjoy it then, and then I got like real into it, and that ending I hated.
Yeah. So I know I it's one of those times where I pressured Tori into watching Merlin a little bit. But he and another one of our friends were watching it at the same time. And so I started watching it again just because I really enjoy the characters. I love Gwen. I love Arthur. I love Merlin. I love Gawain. All of them are just such fun. But I think ultimately what first piqued my interest was, oh, it's not just an Arthur story, and Anthony Stewart Head is in it too. And so he played Giles on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And honestly, that was probably my biggest draw initially. Because I know it was playing on it was either Sci-Fi Channel, no, it was on Channel 4. And then it jumped into the Sci-Fi Channel, I think, because it wasn't even on BBC America. So I was watching it every Sunday, and it felt nostalgic in a lot of ways, because if you remember, Xena and Hercules would show up in syndication, right, on Saturdays. And so that was a big part of my fantasy weekend, right, just watching fantasy shows. And so not having that for so long felt weird, and I missed that. And so then Legend of the Seeker came out, which is one of my favorite shows. I can't believe I actually haven't bullied you into watching Legend of the Seeker, Tori, now that I think about it. Kaylin is the best. But anyway, so, and then Legend of the Seeker was canceled as well, and so I had Merlin, and so that was nice. But I think one of the things that really caught my attention with Merlin once I watched the first episode was the fact that Merlin and Arthur were going to be friends, right? Rather than Merlin being the teacher figure, the guy, the old hermit to guide Arthur. In this case, they're going to be learning together. It's going to be a young King Arthur's court, but Arthur is actually a prince. He's not what's his face is Sir Ector's ward, right? He's actually a prince. He knows that Uther Pendragon is his father, so he's not the fair unknown this time. He is in line and learning to be a king. And so I really enjoyed that. The other thing I just liked is Merlin is adorable. Like Colin Morgan, I think is his last name. It's just adorable. I think he's such a good actor.
He sure is a lot.
He showed up on The Crown in an episode. He did such a good job in that role. And then on Humans, is that what it was called? No.
Being Human.
Being Human? Okay, no.
That's the one you were talking about?
No. It was like where he was playing a robot.
Oh, yeah.
Humans, right?
Humans.
It is Humans, right? I thought it was Humans, yeah, with Gemma Chan.
Gemma Chan's in it, yeah. She's phenomenal
He was great in that. So as an actor, I just really like him. And then I liked, I keep forgetting to mention Morgana. I love Morgana as a character. I love Gwen. Gwen is just so pure and so sweet. And when she knows her strengths, right? Like she's not handy with a sword, but if she has to pick one up, she will, right? And so it was an ensemble effort. I just really enjoyed the cast, and I liked the stories. It was a different version of Arthur that I was accustomed to, but I really liked it.
I agree. I think that what I enjoyed about that story was that friendship that's established between the characters and the fact that they are young. There's almost a sweetness to the story, right? Because they're so young and innocent and naive. And so I really enjoyed that for that reason, because it's a coming of age story, and they all seem they're all portrayed by relatively young actors, right? And so it seems relatable, right? Morgana's journey from being the ward, and finding out that she has magic, and sort of, having to contend and hide that, and then also trying to fighting her impulses to do good, and then finding out the channels for what she can do in that goodness, right? I think was an interesting journey for Morgana as well, right? Having to fight against her demons and having to come out of it, and then sort of being wrecked by her teenage decision making, right? And I really enjoyed, the bromance that developed between Arthur and Merlin, right? Because at the end of the day, like that friendship between Bradley and Colin really, really really shines in their performances, so that you have like really great episodes where like Merlin is under enchantments, and he's trying to kill Arthur.
That's my
And like
favorite. So funny.
yes, and like Arthur's like, you big doof, right? Like Merlin just fails consistently in those efforts.
And the funny thing is, he tells half of Camelot, "Oh, so what are you up to?" He's like, "Oh, I'm trying to kill Arthur." And everyone's like, "Oh, he's writing you hard this week." And he's like, "Yep, gonna kill him." And they're like, "Ha ha ha, that's funny, Merlin." And no one takes him seriously, even though he has a bow and arrow in his hand and he's testing it to see if like he can kill Arthur. The best.
Yes, and like Bradley did a really nice job with the comedic moments as well. Like when he had donkey ears, that was a really great episode. Colin was fantastic in his old woman witch role.
He was fantastic anytime he was old. It was so funny. I love when he's like, "Oh, I'm Dragoon," and then he's like, "Well, why are you doing this?" And then you have a moment of hesitation because he's like, "I didn't really think this through," right? He's just a really funny actor. Funny.
Yeah, and the knights that eventually join Arthur's group. I mean, they're hot. They were so pretty to look at.
Also, like the short sleeve chainmail, though, I was like, that's a choice.
That I support.
You have to see Percival's muscles, right?
Right. I mean, I'm not complaining, but I'm like, isn't that supposed to protect you? Is he in like a chainmail tank top?
You know what? Those are choices that I support.
Right? Like, I'm like, I'll allow it.
Yes. But like that's what I really enjoyed was that, like, because they were such a young cast, right? They were able to, really focus on the bonds that they were making as these characters and forging a nation, right? And also, out of it came all of these like sweet moments and sweet narratives.
Like, you can tell the cast bonded with each other, and that during that time too, they all grew as actors as well, like over the 4 years or so.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think one of like the feelings I feel of the show was that like we sort of get a time jump. Like we keep getting this constant narrative from Kilgar the dragon about Merlin's legacy and how he's going to become this like really great wizard or warlock, and he's going to usher in a golden era of Camelot with Arthur. And so a season devoted to that, and then Arthur dies. And so that was sort of like what I felt I got short shrifted.
Me too.
Was that like we never got to experience that golden age in a very meaningful way, because we spent so much time with Uther's Camelot. Mm-hmm. And I felt like it was because they wanted to keep Uther, Anthony Head, as part of the cast. And I feel like in that way they really hurt themselves in terms of the narrative, because I just feel like we didn't really achieve that. Like by the end of it, like Camelot is just a very small nation, and there is a promise that it's going to be a golden nation with Gwen at the head, and I did appreciate that. Like Gwen is that queen that leads them forward, but I wish that we would have seen more of that golden Camelot.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think season 3, there were a lot of fun episodes in season 3, but that's where you started to feel the lag, right? Where like, when is Arthur going to become king? And then when Morgana officially goes quote unquote evil, right? Because I there's some things I disagree with you on Morgana, Tori, but there's
other nothing wrong.
Where I totally agree with you. I think like the categorization of her as evil, that's ridiculous, right? Like the label was branded on her because of the fact that she uses magic, right? And then this entire time we're seeing Merlin use magic specifically for the good of Camelot, and Morgana was never given that space, right? It was like, oh, you can use magic so long as you're quiet about it. And I think that's such a weird fucked up commentary on a woman's role, right? Like, oh, you can be magical and powerful so long as it's a secret. And so she rebelled against that. And that, I agree with you, she did nothing wrong. Now, when she had like all of the Camelot citizens lined up so that they could watch the execution of the knights, and then instead of killing the knights, she killed the civilians, that's not okay. That was wrong.
I mean, they were not good civilians. They should have been nicer.
But I think in those seasons where she just kind of goes batshit, well, not batshit, I'm sorry, that's because she's not crazy. But when she lets loose, right, and she finally embraces the full-on use of magic, I really enjoyed that season. But again, that was really short. It was really short.
On point.
Her hair was gorgeous. Her
point.
I love the costuming. It was so
the costuming in this show is phenomenal. Like,
it was absolutely brilliant and wonderful and awesome. And the only thing I'm mad at is that we didn't get more Santiago Cabrera by himself, a little shirtless, maybe. Yeah, that would have been nice. But,
a scene that really stands out for me that I think about a lot still that I really liked is so they did some stuff with I'm borrowing what Jen and I had talked about in text message, I think. But I've been thinking about it a lot lately is with Gwen, how instead of, maybe it was, I don't remember somebody told me this, but she's typically written as, a noble, right? She's a princess and she marries Arthur, but she's not in Merlin, right? She's like a chambermaid, right? Or is that what they're called, chambermaid? Yeah. She helps Morgana get pretty and all that stuff, but she's the daughter of a blacksmith, and there's this scene where I forget what, I think somebody's locked up and she's like, joke's on you, bitches, I'm the daughter of a blacksmith, and she's like fucking makes a key because she knows how to do that. And I was like, that's so cool. And I just really enjoyed, I think about that scene a lot because she's like, joke's on you, you think I'm just this dainty princess, but bitch, my daddy a blacksmith and I can make swords and shit too.
Yeah, I think it's the knights who are locked up, and so she helps them escape. Yeah. And so Morgana knows that she's going to help them escape, and so she's watching them, right? But it doesn't, that's one of my favorite scenes though, because you see Gwen struggle, right? Because on one hand, she's loyal to Morgana because she's been her friend, right? And Morgana never treated her like a maidservant until she started going quote unquote evil. At that point, that's when you start seeing the relationships change. And it's difficult, and that's one of the things that really does bother me about the series though, because Uther ultimately kills Gwen's father, right? He murders him because he accuses him of treason, I think it is. And you never actually see the fallout of that, right? You have this great moment to see, you never see that with Gwen, right? Because for Gwen, first, we have a Black British actress playing Gwen, which I think is such a beautiful moment, right? Because this is a Black character who's going to outlive the king, right? We already know this from the story. Gwen always outlives King Arthur. And so that means she's actually going to be queen. She's going to be a ruler. And that is such a lovely and beautiful commentary because I do like that shift, right? Because this is one Black character that is, and that's one of the problems with media is that often Black characters are subject to really violent deaths. If not violent, then they do die, right? And in this case, she didn't, and she wasn't going to. So I love that, right? I love that she's going to survive and kind of be the inheritor of this wonderful Camelot that she actually helps build, right? Because she releases the knights. She helps the knights kind of train when Camelot's kind of going through its hardest time. And, she's a great character. But she is often isolated because of her status and because the king kills her father, right? And then her brother's actually on the run for some time. So I think that it's one of those things where I really wish we would have seen a little bit more of Gwen, right? And how she's kind of having to contend with all of this. But I also feel like the treatment of her was very British, right? It's keep a stiff upper lip and keep working. And that bothers me, right? Because this is a more modern version of Merlin. And I think there was space for us to dive deeper into Gwen's character. But they didn't. So I think that's a missed opportunity there.
And yet I feel like they were able to redeem a lot of these characters, right? Like Gwen for a very long time had that, and probably still has among many people, like has that reputation of being that being that adulterer, right? That cheats on Arthur and ruins Camelot through her adultery, right? And so you really get a redemption of that with Gwen. And they still that illicit affair, because they do in like season 4, but under the trope of magic, and Gwen does like repent and has to go through that repentant period, but like at the end of the day, like Gwen is well-meaning, Gwen is sweet, and Gwen is hardworking, and she's resourceful, and that's something that isn't portrayed in the original myth, in the original literature. As Gwen is never portrayed as resourceful, and I think that was important to see on the screen, is in that one act of like, oh, I'm a blacksmith's daughter, I can break these guys out of jail, right?
I agree. I think the depiction of her was largely positive, and I do enjoy that. I really like the fact that she wasn't a damsel in distress, right? And even in occasions where she was a damsel in distress, she figured it out.
Right.
And she was a nice stabilizing force for someone like Arthur, right? Especially because Merlin is always the character who's kind of going to push Arthur to be a little bit, yes, be thoughtful, but also like, fuck tradition, like your dad's wrong about magic. And Gwen's more like, all right, you got to think about your people, right? And so I think that the three of them become like this really important trinity for Camelot.
Agree. And I think that's kind of also the disappointing part of Merlin too, now that you bring up magic, right, was because at the end of the day, like magic isn't accepted. Mm-hmm. Like under Arthur's reign, like it's still not accepted. Maybe the harsh punishments aren't carried out like they were under Uther's reign, but Merlin still can't practice outside of and really be his true self, right? And that's part of the conflict that is had with Morgana.
And when he actually tells Arthur, Arthur doesn't trust him. Mm-hmm. That was heartbreaking. I didn't like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And all of that is kind of squished into that final episode, right? Where you see a breakdown of their friendship, and then also a quick resolution to that conflict, because at the end of the day, like Arthur kind of says, okay, you're still Merlin, right?
And dies.
And then dies, yeah.
Right.
That's one of the things that you were talking about, where like there's this entire prophecy woven throughout the show that Merlin is going to be the one to bring back magic. He's going to bring back the old ways. And that never happens, right? And the same thing is said about Morgana, right? Because Morgana is also going to be, but in a darker way, supposedly. But you never actually see that happen. And then when it does happen, it kind of just ends. And I don't know if it's a ratings thing. It might have been a ratings thing. I think I read somewhere that they only planned 5 seasons, but I could be wrong. But I agree with you. I do think the ending was disappointing. I do still like that last scene though, where Merlin's walking in modern day.
Yes, that is the redemptive part of it. Is that I was like, okay, I like that Merlin gets to live on, and it fits. It's fitting because he is this warlock, right? And I like that part. It's kind of like when Buffy looks into the sunset and has that slight smile, right? And still, Sunnydale's gone. It's totaled. Life, they don't know what's gonna happen. Hope. That's what I liked about that one scene with Merlin, is that there's hope that he will resurrect, right, and bring things back, right? But I don't like the compounding of everything into like one episode and one season that didn't deliver promise.
I agree. And even with that Buffy episode, I'll be honest with you, that first time I watched it, I was like, what the hell is this? This is it. And I understand the feelings of that with Merlin, right? Because you're right, everything happens in one season, in a few episodes actually, because you get a lot of lag time. In particular, but I see the thing that I do really like with Morgana's character though is that, and I'm going to compare her to Daenerys from Game of Thrones. I'm sorry, spoiler alert, Tori.
No.
Whereas you see Morgana's slow evolution into what she eventually becomes, right? Like it is actually built up from season 1 to season 5. You don't actually see that with Dany, right? With Dany, it's like, oh, she's great, 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 great. She's awful, right? And so that's one of the things that I really did enjoy, the care that they took with someone like Morgana's character to show us all the different ways, because she and Merlin are very parallel, right? They're both kind of going through the same thing. They're both magical beings in a place where magic is outlawed. And so they're both going through very similar trials and having very similar experiences when it comes to magic. But whereas Merlin kind of adapts and learns how to live within the system, Morgana's like, no, fuck it, the system's wrong.
Right.
And in that, I think she's absolutely right? She wants to destroy what has allowed for the kind of discrimination that you see against magical beings in a way that Merlin doesn't, right? Merlin is a little bit more agent within, right? Trying to change it from within because he believes in Arthur. Morgana's like, I don't care about Arthur. I care about the fact that people like me are killed at the stake, right? And so in that, I absolutely, she's 100% right.
She's very metal. She's just like middle fingers up, head banging, like to like take down all this craziness.
I think the show does a really, I don't know if it's a good job, but I do like that parallel between Morgana and Merlin and their experiences when it comes to magic and what Brenda is describing. I think it's also coming, it's very much informed by their gender, right? And also their social statuses. One of the reasons Morgana is taking that position of F the system, let's abolish it, is because she's always had privilege on herself, right? If Gwen was in that position, she'd have a very different approach. I think she'd have a Merlin approach of, I don't want to lose what I already have, right? And so that was a really good visual and maybe conversation that they had, was like how people go about dismantling these systems and beliefs, and the two different approaches to it, right?
Absolutely. And it keeps going. Speaking of, and I don't want to say that this is a privileged position because it's not, but the fact that Morgana is an orphan, right? She doesn't have her family. So when she says, screw the system, she's very much like, she's only thinking about herself, because in that moment, the only life she's putting on the line is herself. Whereas with Merlin and Gwen, they're constantly thinking, my dad, my brother, my mother, right? For I keep calling him Morgan. For Merlin, it's about protecting his mother. And then when his father comes around, who turns out to be a dragon lord, he wants to protect him too. And you see that and Gaius, right? Having to protect Gaius. So I think it's a very strong commentary on community as well, where you're seeing those differences, right? Merlin had the support of a community who were like, we're going to keep your secret. You got to be careful. Morgana didn't have that, right? She had her sister eventually, but she didn't have that for a long time. And her sister wasn't a part of Camelot. She was on the outside, and like her sister, unlike Merlin's community, Morgause wanted to destroy the system, right? And so you see these very different paths, very similar goals, but very different paths to addressing this big issue.
Agree. And I'm wondering, like, we get a very young Merlin here, right? Like, in what ways does that work against the story or for the story, and how does his young interpretation stack up against other iterations of Merlin?
I think the younger he is, the more hopeful he is, right? Because we're so used to the old wizard-like, Gandalf-like, Dumbledore version of Merlin, right? who's just like really bitter and done with the world, and will help Arthur because it's like, maybe if I'm gonna have hope, I'm gonna have it in this kid. I guess I'll guide him. But in this, it's actually him who's motivating Arthur to be that hopeful beacon of light eventually for all of Camelot. So I think that that's what's happening there. I don't know that he's necessarily successful, right? Because obviously we only get one episode of like the glorious Camelot that we all want. But I think that that's the message, right? That sense of hope that Merlin imbues into Arthur.
Yeah, I think that I think you're right by saying that like a younger Merlin, and especially this version of Merlin, adds more hopefulness to the character, and especially with the mission that always is incumbent in the Merlin character, which is to foster innovation and change and creativity, right? Under this umbrella of magic. And so I think that his youngness really helps support that in a way that in recent iterations of Merlin, where we have an older Merlin, like his ingenuity and his goals are come off as scheming, as suspicious, right? Because I'm thinking of like even the most recent iteration of or reimagining of the Arthur tale with Cursed on Netflix portrays a Merlin that's scheming, that is untrustworthy, that has his own agenda. You know, that kind of dark Dumbledore figure from that one recent HP movie, right? Like that's very similar in vein. Like you get, those are the types of Merlin characters that we're getting. And it's really hard, you know, we're almost being trained as an audience not to trust the Merlin character.
And this is just a side question. I know that we have other questions to answer, but does it not bother you as a teacher? Because quintessentially, Merlin is always a teacher for Arthur, right? To have the wizard teacher being portrayed in such a dark, conniving, scheming kind of way, I feel like I don't know, I don't like this idea that teachers are scheming and trying to trick their students into learning. Like that really bothers me. I don't know.
I don't like that. I haven't seen it, but I don't like that.
Well, like Dumbledore, right? Working
behind the scenes. You know, that's a really great point that I hadn't really thought about. But you know, I think that kind of dovetails really nicely into like, I guess the dangers of like a reimagining of a Merlin character in that respect, right? Because then now you're teaching a younger audience or an audience to be suspicious of teachers and their agendas, and I think political agendas, right? And I think there's a lot of discussion of how, like, you know, rhetoric out there that teachers bring, you know, try to indoctrinate students into their liberal minded agendas or conservative minded agendas. And so that, you know, what you just brought up really kind of lends itself to that discussion.
Absolutely. Go ahead, sorry.
I think too, because we see this with the Seven Deadly Sins Merlin as well, where she's gender bent, but she's also kind of like mysterious and a little schemy, and we're not really sure if they're good or bad. Like they're doing all this science and magic stuff for research, but it's like, what are you researching and why are you researching it? And like, are you manipulating the team? Like, are you manipulating Arthur, who's like this little fuckboy she's like has on a leash? Like, right? Like, because like they very much pair them in that power dynamic where Merlin is this like full-bodied, tig-all-bitty sorceress, and then you've got this little like scrawny Arthur who's like, yeah, Merlin, let's do a thing. Like, I mean, she's like, be quiet, mommy's talking. Like, right?
You're right. I don't even know what to do with that. That was a really great point, Brenda. Like, yeah. I'm really bothered by that now. You're right.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's something that's been bothering me as I'm watching Cursed, and I watched I think it was HBO, or it might have been Starz Camelot. I don't know. It wasn't very good, but I do remember watching and having the same feeling of like, I understand because I think it was something that we all grew up with, right? When we're like, oh, knowledge is power, and you're telling this to kids, right? And then that association with then teachers are powerful, then teachers are evil, right? Like that, no, right? Like, and that's one of the things that I think our media is making a mistake in kind of going that route, right? Especially when it comes to big teacher figures, right? That are meant to be guiding rather. And it's not that they're, and let me just say this, for anyone who's ever worked in academia, you know that those are the most conservative places that you might work in, right? This myth of instructors indoctrinating students into liberal politics, that's not reality, right? It just isn't. But anyway, that aside, I think there needs to be a level of consideration when it comes to the Merlin character and the Morgana character, because I feel like those two are very rich characters that can play off of each other well. But I don't like, that's one of the reasons why I love the Merlin version, right? Because you do see them kind of working together and in parallel, right? Whereas with other versions, it's, oh, this one old guy who is either just really out old and grumpy and the guide, or he's a scheming dude who has his ulterior motives for helping Arthur, right? And I think that that is scary. And I mean, I think it definitely reflects our current reality in the sense of this is what people think teachers are like, and that bothers me. But
I think it's that lack of context, right? Like,
absolutely.
You know, we either get the old Merlin that we grew up with, or we get this like middle-aged Merlin that's very suspicious and not trustworthy, or we get a young Merlin, and that there is no follow through. There is no path for the audience to see Merlin develop into these individuals and see the life experiences that led to these personality shifts, right? Instead, we just scheming Merlin. And I think that's what's valuable about having a young Merlin, like in the BBC version, is that you see this as a young kid making mistakes.
Yeah.
And that he's trying his best to, one, live in this society that has already said, we don't want you, right? And two, live in the society knowing that he has to invoke change because of some sort of, undue burden that was placed on him, right? This prophecy. So he has to work with these two things in mind. And so you see a very young man making mistakes and making the best effort at it that he can. And then you get to see you get to see or imagine a Merlin, an older Merlin that maybe is informed by all those mistakes and all those decisions. And you can see maybe him being a bit more jaded, a bit more guarded, right? But we understand that because we saw him struggle as a young man, right?
Yeah.
And I think the problem with like recent iterations of Merlin is that, one, they want to give him more breadth and more character. And so they're thinking, okay, who is this guy? Like, let's not make him this bunkers kind of like jokey kind of guy. And instead, they're going to say, oh, he's cranky. So we get like the crankiness. We get he's smarter than everyone in the room. So he has like that house quality, which is that show on Fox. And so he knows all the answers. And those characters are typically like very to the point, direct. You don't know what they're doing, but they've already figured things out in their mind. So they're kind of taking that approach with that character. And by taking that approach, they're leading to what Brenda now just highlighted, right? They're creating a teacher character that folks are going to naturally be suspicious of, right? And that has ramifications.
Yeah, very negative ones, I think. Don't get me wrong, the old teacher, grumpy teacher is also a dangerous trope, but I think that's one of the things that Merlin does well is give space for nuance, right? Whereas I think Tori and I have had conversations about Morgana and how she is right. Exactly, right? And so, but in all of that, right? And I always come back to like, yeah, she wasn't wrong until she murdered civilians, right? And then it becomes this struggle, right? Well, exactly, right? But there's space for conversation, whereas
maybe they should have brought all those people at the stake back.
Yes, maybe, you know what, and you're right, the civilians weren't entirely
I'm messing with you.
innocent though, because no, people were, I mean, like magical folks were burned at the stake, right? Because
right. They didn't try to throw a riot and stop it. They could have overthrown the king, like we saw it happen in Anastasia.
Yeah, and so, but see, there's space for nuance. Whereas
Right.
when you watch something like Cursed, yeah, Merlin shady as fuck.
Yeah.
There's just not a lot of room for interpretation, and I think that is dangerous, especially for something that is reimagining such an old legend, right? Though I will say, Curse does a lot of other things well. It's just a pretty thing to watch, I think. Their Morgana character is very interesting too. But anyway, we're not talking about Curse. But I do think that that's one of the things that we can touch on. Because we talked about Hamilton and Anastasia, right? And some of the dangers with reimagining history. We're seeing this with this legend, right? Because Merlin's not actually history. We're reimagining
Right.
him, right? And in this case, I think it does a lot of good things, right? Because one, in casting a Black British actress, we finally recognize, you know what? Black people existed in medieval times. It wasn't like they just showed up out of nowhere. They were there, right? They were part of history. And so to finally acknowledge that on screen, about flipping time, right? And so I love that. On the other hand, the other thing we also have is this powerful female lead in Morgana, who is nuanced and isn't just evil to be evil. She actually has reasons for her beliefs, and we understand that. And so we can have this conversation where Tori's like, oh, she did nothing wrong. And me, like, she's kind of in the moral gray area. I agree with you on one hand, and then, right, it's difficult. So I do think that there's some space and some discussion for that. What do you all think about what this show did well or didn't do well?
One of the things that I'm kind of like circling in my head right now, is I'm thinking a lot about like, because we were talking about, so like Alexander Hamilton, real person, Anastasia Romanov, real person. I feel like the general population in the world feels like King Arthur's a real person, but I don't know if that's because of it being such a well-known myth, or if that's actually because it's a myth, or like I don't know what, like I'm like circling that in my head. Like I'm like wondering if the reimagining is as dangerous or not as dangerous when it's a fictional character that's being reimagined, right? Like it's kind of something I'm playing with in my head. I haven't fully fleshed it out yet, but that's something that I'm thinking about. I'm like, is it damaging to like radically revise fictional characters that have this like long-standing myth if they don't have like a physical, actual person history behind them, right? Like it's not like an actual lived person. But I don't know. I'm still working that out. But that's where my brain is at currently.
I'm going to answer that question. Yeah, it is dangerous because these legends actually teach us things about the culture that the culture seems to deem important, right? So like that legacy of like nobility, right? That you have to act as the knight's code, right? You have to act a certain way, right? You're still replicating those structures and they show up in your fiction. So I do think there's some danger to that, right? Whether or not because I mean, think about like, not to get well, yeah, I'm going to get religious right now, but when you think about the Christ figure, right? We know Jesus Christ was real, right? But ultimately, would it matter? Because we're still thinking about the lessons he taught us, right? I think that becomes more important. So yeah,
I see what you're saying for sure.
Yeah, I think that I think legends and myths have a very interesting position in our society, where like what you said, Brenda, what I think you're getting at, Tori, is that they're meant to be didactic in nature, right? They come with morals, and they replicate certain systems that we need to adhere to be a civil society. And so I think we kind of touched upon that with the Merlin character, and now the sudden that suspicious teacher character, and what are the ramifications for that for a younger audience, and what does that mean and spell out for education moving forward, right? And that trust that teachers and students have to have in order to have informative environments, right? And fruitful learning environments. I think that's kind of one of the dangers of this reimagining of that Arthur tale, that Merlin tale, right? And I want to say too, like, I think, as we kind of wrap up here, for me, and I don't think enough has been done with that Morgana character to redeem her. And I think that's the one character in the tale that is consistently portrayed as that evil woman trope. And that's very problematic.
Yeah.
And I think we can do better, and we should do better, and we haven't done better. And
Absolutely agree, Jen.
yeah, and Brenda has written a bunch about female utopia, utopianism and intersectionality. So I think she can probably explain better what I mean of the Morgana character needing to be better.
So then this is something that happens a lot in feminist utopian fiction, is that they'll imagine a space that is wonderful and it works for everyone, but specifically it works very well for those women at the top, right, who control the utopia. In this case, Morgana is seeking a magical utopia in every iteration that she is presented in, but because that's her ideal, right, and because she's a woman in power, she's often deemed evil and not socially acceptable, right? So the only result can be that she either has to die or she has to die. Literally, those are her two options, right? And that it's only one
die
option.
to be redeemed or die to be the plot point. Like that's
right.
like the
because
big
anything else disrupts the patriarchal system, right? And so those are one of the things that I think Jen is pointing out, that we really do need to do better with our fiction, right? Because we can't continue to fear the powerful woman. That, first of all, it's a boring story. We've been there, done that. We need better stories, right? And that's what I meant with I'm more than happy to reimagine stories, because I feel like each generation has to come up with a fiction that works for them, right? And so our Morgana character needs to evolve with us, and she needs to be a little bit more powerful and stronger. With that in mind, I think that actually that kind of wraps up our discussion of Merlin, because we are running a little long. Next week, well, actually not next week, tomorrow we will be recording our discussion of Howl's Moving Castle. That this is my first experience with a what's his name, Tori?
Hayao Miyazaki.
Thank you. So this is my first encounter with his work, so that was interesting. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. In the meantime, please stay safe, wear your masks, practice physical distancing, and we'll see you next time. Bye.